Simon, it goes on and on. It goes on and on. The exodus of individuals, whether it's a member of staff, whether it's a player, whether it's a member of a management team, from Brighton to Chelsea. And now we know this is the latest one. Brighton have placed their head of recruitment, Sam Jewell, on gardening leave after he accepted an offer to join Chelsea. Potter went, Billy Reid went, Cucurella went, on and on it goes. Did you ever pinch people from other clubs or go back to the same club? When you were at Palace, did you think, we'll have him, and while we're at it, we'll have him, and him?
I don't recall doing that. No, not specifically.
Seems to be the case here, doesn't it?
I mean, ultimately, people are very good at seeing the vision when the vision has arrived somewhere else. I had it done to me a few times with managers that came in, were successful, and other people coveted them. And then ultimately the consequences of that is that they tend to cover other things that you've got as well, because it's part of a team. Managers are part of a team of people that build successes, whether it's directors of football, whether it's managers, whether it's players that they've acquired, whether it's players that they've developed or been fortunate enough to be involved in the development of. So it doesn't surprise me that this goes on and happens more regularly now, because more often than not, those that have the money are bone idle, don't bother doing the research, and there isn't a needs-must mentality. Whereas with teams like Brighton, there's a needs-must mentality. Tony runs it in a certain way, and he demands that of his people. That's why the sophistication behind what people have to pay to get his people. That's why people that he got involved with have gardening leave and can't just walk out the door and do as they want, because there's a commercial thought process into a football business.
Right.
So all that in mind, Chelsea don't have any ideas of their own. So they come along and take someone else's ideas. And right now, at this moment in time, none of those ideas have been particularly good, have they?
Well, it's a new role for him. It's a new role for him once he gets to Chelsea. He's not going to get to Chelsea till about November, we think.
Right.
So he's in the garden, if that's what gardening leave means.
Leave.
And until then. But this fellow was wanted. He's wanted by a few clubs. Rangers fancied him as a technical advisor as well, but failed, and he opted to stay at Brighton. So it seems that many of the clubs are going for the same people.
Well,
is that by word of mouth?
Well, yeah, and awareness, and obviously success is has many fathers, isn't it? And so you see the intellectual capital behind it and think, okay, I can utilise that in my operation because it's much more difficult to create it myself.
Yeah.
I'll take what's already there.
Yeah.
And Brighton seem to be the flavour of the month right now for other clubs in terms of Chelsea specifically taking people. But this idea, I was listening to Sky Sports News, and despite the fact you've learned very little from them, every now and again you might pick up something that's worth listening to. And I was listening to Carvey talk about this idea of people outside of the dugout, people outside of football now being sought after by other football clubs. And he certainly sort of ruminated on the scenario of, there's always been ties and shirts and ties around it. Yeah, but the difference is now is the cost implications of football are so significant. The biggest problem that football clubs have got is to do the right recruitment. So they're going to spend time and money on getting people that clearly have a better understanding of what recruitment should look like and are able to tailor make it to the clubs that they're going in terms of they've got control over recruitment on. So if you look at, say, Dan Ashworth, an example to this fellow that's going to Brighton. Yeah. Dan Ashworth is the flavour of the month right now. He's been afforded a lot more credit than perhaps some of his deeds warrant, but notwithstanding that, he's successful. And now people are prepared to pay potentially £20 million compensation to get him released from a gardening leave, because he's going to be responsible for recruiting probably £1 billion of players over the next 5 years, and XYZ managers, and bringing in a recruitment policy that enables them to be able to sell players on and manage a football club effectively. So these guys are becoming more effective. If people had more diligence behind their thinking, people like Tonelli wouldn't slip through the net, because you'd understand the psychological profile of the player. You'd get them to sign obligations upon themselves.
Or Sandro Tonali at Newcastle.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So this idea that there's this next generation of important people inside football clubs is purely and simply because the asset base of football clubs has become so much more expensive.
Sam, I wanted to ask you that on Ashworth. I mean, Manchester United, we now know, have made a formal approach to Newcastle for their sporting director, Dan Ashworth. After he was placed on gardening leave, as you rightly say, Simon, by Newcastle. It's thought that 20 million is the figure that Newcastle would want to let him go.
Fair play to them.
But is there a winner in this? Because when you look at the predicament now of the two clubs, you look at it closely. Manchester United are somewhat backed into a corner in terms of, no, don't offer us that because it's going to take that. So they're out the picture for a moment. And Newcastle have lost his services for the time being, probably for all time now.
But that's the reality of football. The challenge for football is if you're a lesser club, irrespective of who owns you, you will find yourself building something that's successful and someone else coming along and taking the endeavours of the fruits of your hard work.
Right.
So with Ashworth, Newcastle took him from where? Brighton.
From Brighton.
So they did to Brighton what's being done to them.
Sure.
Right? So that's the way the world works. And the challenge for them is to have the diligence, which they clearly have had, is to protect themselves from a perceived bigger football club just coming in, plundering and taking when it suits them, and no consequence or sort of balancing act for the club that had him.
Yeah.
So he's been there for 18 months or 20 months, however long he's been there for. He's been responsible for about 250, 300 million pounds of transfers, somewhere in that region, maybe a little bit less. Most of them have worked out well. He's gone to Man United. And I'm well played to Newcastle. If Newcastle can go to Man United, you want him, you got to pay for it.
Right.
And
would you hold out for your 20 million?
Damn right I would.
Right.
Damn straight I would. I'd make them pay every single last cent that I could possibly rinse out of them, because they don't get to take my vision in the same way that maybe Newcastle had to pay compensation to Brighton.
I mean, are you amazed at the amount of money we're talking about here for these guys? They are members of staff. I know they're senior members of staff.
But they're not. If you're following the line of what I've just said, United have bought £1.6 billion worth of players over the last 10 years. They've had a litany of managers. Their recruitment policy's gone to the dogs. Their development of young players has gone to the dogs. They're not a great football club at doing things on the pitch. So at this moment in time, if they bring somebody in that costs them £3 or £4 million a year wages and £20 million compensation fee, and he's responsible for the next 5 years of £1 billion worth of transfer fees, X amount of wages.
It's worth the money.
It's worth the money.
Yeah.
This is what you pay.
Interesting point from Chris Wright in South Wales. Chelsea's recruitment of Brighton players and staff becoming embarrassing. None of them yet proven to be a success. It proves that you can take a club's personnel, but you can't take their model. Brighton are laughing all the way to the bank here at Chelsea's expense.
That's assuming that Chelsea, they were the only club that were in for these players and these managers. Potter was a sought-after commodity. Chelsea got him. It was a too big a job for him. Caicedo and other players and Cucurella and whoever else they've signed from Chelsea, from Brighton, were wanted by other football clubs. Chelsea just had a bigger checkbook than them.
Sure.
So it's not as if Chelsea just suddenly decided to light upon Brighton. Other people were already looking at them. Now,
I've news for you. While you were applying Factor 40 to your good self over in Spain, Alan Pardew was sitting in that very seat yesterday.
Oh, yes.
He had a tilt at you because you said, regards Newcastle, Eddie Howe, the man in place now and has done a great job. But when it comes to winning the major baubles like the Champions League, maybe Eddie won't be there to see that happen. Eddie might just be a gatekeeper of the club. And Pardew called you out on your terminology.
Well, I don't like the term gatekeeper. I think that's not respectful to Eddie Howe.
Interim manager.
It's just not, it's just not a nice thing to say about somebody who's done a terrific job, in my opinion. And I think it's always going to be a difficult year after the fantastic year they had last year, and the Champions League campaign, which I actually commentated on and went to most of their games. And they got found out a little bit. That quality was just above them. And they're suffering. That they haven't been as brilliant. They're not as fluid as they was last year. There needs to be some surgery on the squad in the summer. And I think Eddie has earned the respect to do that surgery.
Alan wasn't having the word gatekeeper.
Okay.
No, he wasn't having it. He thought it was disrespectful.
The day I worry about Alan Pardew's opinion will be a sad day for me. But the point is that you look at it and say, what is it then? Next question is, Alan, is he going to win the Premier League for Newcastle? Is he going to win the Champions League for Newcastle? Answer that question, because clearly that's going to be the blueprint for Newcastle, because the Saudis didn't own the football club just to sit there and play footsie with the Premier League. So if he's not going to do that, Alan, are you going to say, will you say that he'll win the Premier League? Probably not. So what is he then? He's a gatekeeper for someone that comes in. It's not disrespectful. If you listen to the entire context of what I've said about Eddie Howe, A, he's done a far better job than I ever anticipated he would do. B, he should be given all the credit for the job that he's done. And C, are the Saudis ambitious, and will Eddie Howe get them to the promised land? And if he's not going to get them to the promised land, then he's going to be a gatekeeper for someone that is. It's nothing disrespectful. This sentimentalization of scenarios is silly. It's grown-up conversations. He is going to be someone that hands the baton over to someone else if he doesn't win the baubles.
Never buy teeth from a catalogue.
There you go.
Anyway, Eddie may or may not be there when Newcastle one day, according to Amanda Savely, win everything.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the TalkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. TalkSPORT.